It's an honor to get a chance to speak with you, especially what we're going to be talking about, which I think is probably one of the most important documentaries that people are going to have a chance to see this year at the Toronto International Film Festival. But before we get into that, I got to ask you, because you're looking great, how are you doing and how you been holding up, man, throughout this whole COVID thing for the last year and a half? The world has definitely changed.
You cannot isolate creativity and your imagination. So I've ignored it all and just kept plowing through it. This film, the Oscar Peterson film, was made during COVID in 7 months, and it's going to be the third film that I've launched during the COVID period, which has been painful in that I've missed an audience to react to on that end of it. So, I've done a lot of virtual stuff and screenings, and I was lucky enough on the Howie Mandel film to do a screening in Miami with an audience. But I'm looking forward to an audience seeing this, because as much as people have great systems at home, to watch Oscar Peterson's music reimagined and reloved and recelebrated on a computer, yeah.
I hear you loud and clear. Let's get right into this right now. Let's give the official definition. What is this documentary about?
Well, let's go back and talk about the fact that the film, I'm calling the film a docu-concert because I didn't want to do a sort of standalone, purely talking heads piece. I mean, every documentary has talking heads, but in order to really appreciate the music, I wanted the relevancy of the music to today, right? So that's why, John Baptiste is in it. That's why I decided to put together a group of musicians, young musicians mostly, to play and celebrate his music. And I was really, Rudy, inspired by Standing in the Shadows of Motown, the structure of that film, and 20 Feet from Stardom, where I remember sitting at the Uptown Cinema for Standing in the Shadows of Motown during TIFF and saying, that's a film I'd like to make one day, where the audience fell in love with a performance, the Funk Brothers, right? And I said, God, if I can ever do that. So when the Oscar opportunity came up, I said, you know what, we're going to shoot literally a jazz concert and weave the story into it, which is what we did in March of this year. We got together and really in the heart of COVID, spaced out our musicians. The crew was so happy to be working, and the musicians too. Denzel Sinclair and Misha and Larnell Lewis and Daniel Clark Bouchard. So many of these people coming together who haven't performed, in over a year and a half. I feel it. I get it. So that was thrilling for me.
What's thrilling for me too is, of course, seeing these performances that are throughout this film. I don't want to give away too much because I want people to experience it like I have in the surprises that come up. But this really is a how do I put this? It's a great tell-all story, not just in Oscar's own, talking about himself, but also the people closest to him, like his wife and other folks. How did you collect all this information? Because, of course, there's you can tell some that's, recently filmed, but then you've got some amazing clips where I'm just like, where the hell did you find this? Because I've never seen anybody speaking about Oscar from this time period like this.
It's a great question, Rudy. I think you always, when you're making documentaries, and I think this might be close to number 50 for me, you have to have a great team that does the visual research, and the directive to them was, I want to see footage I haven't seen before. Go find that obscure concert in Copenhagen. Go find that obscure concert in Stockholm or wherever in Germany. I want to see stuff I haven't seen. I want to hear from people I haven't seen in a while. And then I want to make people feel good by seeing Count and Duke and Ella and whatnot. But find me stuff that we haven't seen before to fall in love with it, Oscar. But then also, I wanted the film to be told through Oscar's words. So you'll see him talk about his life from, the age of 16 or 17 till, in his 70s. And you see that progression through his life. So finding those interviews where he's very candid about his marriages, he's very candid about life on the road, he's very candid about racism, and what he experienced, which had to be a big part of the film for me. I spent a lot of time with Quincy Jones, who's a good friend, and he would tell me, in great detail what his Green Book experience was like and what his life was like on the road. So I couldn't not, have that. And then, of course, weaving that to the relevance of today, critical. We'll talk about that. But I wanted to make sure that this was a love letter and at the same time, really something that Oscar would be proud of.
I'm going to jump around because you talked about the racism. Let's go into that right now because I found it very, very fascinating. One of the things I do personally myself love when I speak to, as I like to use the term, the old school legends, when they talk about those days, because as much as I've gone through, which you've probably gone through in this day and age, what they went through was horrific. Can you talk a little bit about that also, too, please? Because he wasn't just a genius when it came to music, but a civil rights activist in his own way, and being able to turn around and say no when it was needed to be said.
Well, I mean, listen, I mean, the story's been told, but I mean, for me to hear it firsthand and experience it, yes, I'm a Jewish person who has experienced anti-Semitism to a certain degree, but nothing compared to, what musicians like Oscar saw on the road, which was unfathomable to me. If you have, appreciative white audiences pouring into hotels and nightclubs to see these amazing artists perform music that they'd never seen before, specifically in the South and even in London and other cities, Montreal, where Oscar faced it as well, where unlike New York, where people are a little bit more open-minded to the genius of jazz, this was sounds they'd never heard before. And so they were amazed by it and loved it, but they still couldn't get past, their racist views of where the artist should eat, sleep, live, go to the bathroom. And I felt as I was making the film and hearing the stories of Oscar and Quincy and Ramsey and others that have been on the road, Herbie on that end of it, have things really changed? And that's why I specifically, when you hear Hymn to Freedom, that choice of including Breonna and George Floyd as part of what Hymn to Freedom, the reason why it was made. This is a song that's not out of date. It's as I say in the film, Obama chose it at his inauguration, first time, that it was so relevant in terms of those words, that so moving to me. Jackie Richardson, still brings down the house. The words are still meaningful. So I wanted people to understand, what musicians like Oscar endured. You can be beloved on stage, but, Oscar told one story which didn't make it into the film, that, somebody comes up to him at the end of the performance and said, that's, it's the greatest music I've ever heard. And Oscar says, thank you very much, and puts his hand out. And the guy says, well, I love your music, but I'm not going to shake the hand of and it's like, and Oscar was, just so puzzled by that. How can you love my music, but not love me as a human being? This world is so starstruck that, you lick the feet of George Clooney, but you won't shake the hands of Oscar Peterson, the hands that create genius. Staggering. And, I think the world needs to still see that and hear that.
Let's talk about the hand, which I think is probably the first time in any kind of documentary or interview that I've ever seen that really represents a gift from God. We talk about his talent. We talk about that he's a genius, a prodigy. But nobody has ever talked about the left hand before like you did. For folks who are wondering, what are we talking about? Please explain that, please, because that is the gift from God.
Well, it's probably the best question I'll ever get on that end of it. I always worried in the film about being too inside baseball, too much musicology and the craft. But you can't ignore the fact that I think I can't remember who it was that says it in the film, that says, maybe Billy Joel, somebody that says, most pianists right hands aren't great. But but to Oscar to have both. But even if you watch him after having a stroke, that left hand to be able to just communicate from God directly into your hand and into the keyboard and just keep going at that speed, which he overcompensated after he had a stroke and could still play. You hear that great line in the film that said, "Hey, the man played better than somebody with two hands." It was just, and I think it's Ramsey Lewis that talked about the fact that he could play the entire 88 keys with one hand and still make it sound like a big band on that end of it. Just ferocious, 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 and it's like a Ferrari. I mean, it's just nonstop power that he has for decades.
And only for somebody, again, like his wife, who knew him, would have even noticed that he was maybe a little off or a little slow. Nobody in the audience would ever know anything about that. You mentioned some names. And let's go through some of the names of the celebrities who talk about his life, because it truly is a who's who. I don't want to give everybody away, just maybe some of the names you've already mentioned, because some names and faces pop up and go, wait a minute, where did he come from? It's great.
Thank you. Well, I mean, putting together the cast for the film, I think I pretty much had everybody I wanted, with the exception of Ahmad Jamal, who I couldn't get based on schedule, and then Chick Corea, who agreed, and then we just lost. So I wanted Ramsey Lewis, of course. I wanted Billy Joel. I wanted John Baptiste, who had just won the Oscar, in terms of the way he plays and his fantastic jazz pianist on that end of it. Even though he's not a jazz pianist, he's a great pianist who can play jazz on that end of it. So getting together that wonder cast was critical for me to tell that story, as well as some intimate people like Kelly Peterson, his wife, and Joel Michaels, his friend for years, who produced, it's not in the film, but produced The Silent Partner, which was with Christopher Plummer and John Candy's first role, was the only film score that Oscar ever did in that. Beautiful, beautiful film, beautiful score on that end of it. So the dream cast I had, I mean, Diana Krall and I couldn't get it together, but that was another one who I would have loved to be in that film. But I'm happy with that. Everybody has something really important to say. Quincy, who's 88 piano keys, 88, who sat down, and another story he had that I'll share that didn't make it into the film, where he ended up having, he was hanging out with Miles Davis, and they decided to go clubbing one night after playing, and they got in the back of a limo, drunk, and said to the driver, take us down to whatever nightclub in New York. And they realized as the car was pulling away that Art Tatum was driving. And of course, your audience, Art Tatum was blind. So hilarious story on that end of it. But I mean, and the other thing too, Rudy, is that most people forget, Oscar was a great jazz musician who recorded brilliant albums, but he was the go-to guy. So there's another 200 albums on top of that, where everybody had to have him on their record. Whoever was performing, on and on and on. Get Oscar, got to get Oscar, got to get Oscar. So, and he never said no. So, I'm thankful that there's a legacy here. And then, the other point in the film too, which I couldn't explore in the depth I wanted to, is where does jazz sit today? Jazz was, as we said in the film, was a genre that, ended up being a place, or a time where Black musicians can be appreciated, and were brilliant at, versus all of the other white crooners and these other bands that were playing that were boring. But why was Benny Goodwin and some of these other famous musicians, Tommy Dorsey, making tons of money all over the radio airwaves, whereas Black musicians were having a harder time on that end of it. And I wanted to talk about the progression of jazz, but also where jazz sits today, which is why I wanted, people like Branford Marsalis, we didn't talk about him, and Baptiste, talking about even rappers today that are influenced by jazz and sample pieces, that jazz is still very much alive.
Well, that's one of the things, and people don't realize when hip hop and rap came out, it was a certain way. But as things progressed, they did go into that sort of jazz rhythm and how they spoke and used the words. So it's a great way in how you were able to make this flow throughout this film. The other thing that I really enjoyed too, and I'm going to throw out four names because you explain their lives and their connection with Oscar and his brilliance and how it was able to shine the way it has. I'm going to give the four names. Norman Granz, Ella Fitzgerald, Herb Ellis, and Ray Brown. To me, those were probably the four most important names as part of telling this story. For folks who don't know why, please explain that.
So Norman Granz was basically a promoter out there. You've heard of other famous promoters that have promoted the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. Norman Granz was a man that loved jazz, but would go to nightclubs where people were talking. It was dirty. They weren't really listening to the music or paying attention. And so he basically takes a big gamble and says, I'm going to take Black artists and I'm going to take jazz and take it to very prestigious venues like Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, the Royal Albert, all over the world, and calls it simply Jazz at the Philharmonic. He labels it as that. He's also a huge activist in terms of civil rights. He protected his artists and would say, you know what, if they can't stay in the hotel I'm staying at, I'm staying in their hotel. They will use the bathroom that I use, and fought for his artists, which was quite incredible and unheard of. Otherwise, people would just go roll with it. Not him, though. And Norman really puts jazz artists on the map with this famous Jazz and Philharmonic tours that he does, and becomes a mentor and a father to Oscar and many other musicians. So that's Norman. Ella sang the way Oscar played. It's that syncopation, that riffing, that scatting, that overall way they played. And their relationship was so, as I understand, so brother sisterly on the road and together. They just, she oozed jazz, she oozed Oscar, and if she can think about a melody, then he just played it. So they were a match made in heaven, and there's so much great stuff. I mean, there's only a little of her in the film, but who can't listen to Ella all day? The voice is just, magic in a way that, artists today, whether it's, Barbra Streisand is not so young, but could sing so beautifully. And even the musicmanship of, Lady Gaga, or even the person I've just fallen in love with, Gregory Porter. Oh, wow. So those are the musicians today on that end of it. So that's Ella. And Herb and Ray were, part of Oscar's trios, part of his trio that, again, he appreciated and understood the role of the drummer, the bass player, the guitar player, and was able to put together that chemistry of all of them to play as a phenomenal part, remembering that, Oscar never even wanted to think about having a solo career on that end of it, because these guys that he played with were so great in interpreting and knowing when to come in. Again, if you watch Oscar play, it's a freight train. Yeah. Where do you come in? How do you complement it? And there was no fighting. They really understood how to make Oscar look great, and he understood how to make them look great. Wow. So, we've all heard about the fights that the Beatles and the Stones have, and all the rock bands of breaking up, and, on that end of it, maybe that was money driven, but these guys really were a unit.
And that unit just shone. One of the things I love, and I hope folks get to see this, is some of the clips that you take, you could see the players watching Oscar's hands and following along. It's almost like we're allowed to be in a secret session, but we're all part of this incredible music.
Thank you for saying that. That was the intention. Go inside, but be accessible. I remember being at TIFF a couple of years ago, and they had a U2 documentary that opened the film festival.
Remember that.
And I mean, I love U2, I love Bono, I love Edge, but it was so inside the making of the music that I watched the audience squirm and be bored. This is, just a night train journey. Come get lost, come enjoy the music, come celebrate a Canadian that should continue to be celebrated, and respect the art form.
How tough was it to get this all put together? I mean, the fact that you have it in TIFF, I think, is incredible with everything that was going on. Oh, I gotta look there.
Well,
It's just like I couldn't imagine putting this stuff together and getting it in for TIFF. I could not imagine the pressure that you must have gone through to see this finally happen.
well, the objective, I didn't make the film to get into TIFF. That TIFF is the gold standard. So
Mhm.
that would be great. If it wasn't ready for TIFF, then we try somewhere else at the end of the day. But that's the gold standard. I didn't rush to get into TIFF, but I had an incredible producer and a guy named Mark Selby and my editor Nicholas Kleiman who understood the vision and the rhythm. And we had a cut pretty quick on that end of it. So that when TIFF became within range of it, and I let Steve Gravestock, who's a great programmer, know that it might be on the horizon. He loved Oscar, so off we went. If you got a look from me, it's always that there's politics, and especially in the era of COVID that we're in, where you don't have 380 films, you have 110. So how do you find a place for a dead guy that's not a political statement, although there's some of that in the film, that isn't going to be as relevant in people's opinions. So it becomes a bigger push. And I'm not saying I had to push TIFF. I think the film speaks for itself, but it becomes, it's you got to maneuver it, navigate it. It's Canada's Cannes Film Festival. You just don't submit and get in. There's gatekeepers. It's not easy, but I'm proud that it will be seen there. I wish it was in the biggest space possible. I'm not quite sure where we're at yet on that, but to see it on an 80-foot screen with an audience, whether it's 6 or 60 or whatever it's going to be, so be it. But let Oscar reign.
What does his family think of the film? Have they had a chance to see it? His daughter, his wife?
Celine has not seen it. We've invited her to see it. I know she'll be very proud of her dad and of this love letter. Kelly Peterson, his widow, saw it. We showed her a rough cut of it about, I'm gonna say 3 weeks, a month ago. She came in with a giant bag of popcorn, never touched it, cried, saw parts of Oscar and footage she'd never seen before, and she was speechless. And that's all I can ask for. I mean, I'm not making the film for her, but having her say, yes, you captured Oscar the right way for somebody that spent a lot of years with him, and I'm moved by it, that I'm happy with that.
What do you hope folks will get from not just seeing this on at TIFF, but in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 50 years, when people want to reminisce about this great person and they watch your film? What do you hope they get from this?
Well, look, I think the film will go from here to Cineplex for a theatrical run, brief theatrical run, then Crave, and then the rest of the world. And I hope everyone who loves jazz, whether you're in Copenhagen or Biloxi, Mississippi, will fall in love with the film. And for me, does the film, if we're going to talk about the list of the great 10 jazz films, I want it on that list. And I want people, I want the film to be timeless. And as the musicians in the film say, that, Oscar, there'll never be another Oscar, but here's what I can learn from him, and just continue to be inspired by a relentless musician. And Rudy, the interesting thing here on the tougher sell on making and selling the film, not a lot of drama here. This isn't Miles. It's not Coltrane. There's no needles in the arm. There's no, premature deaths. There's no crazy stuff. It's just, as Oscar says at the beginning of the film, I came to play. That's
That's it.
it. That's what he
That
cared about, and that's all he cared about till the day he left us. He just wanted to play and love playing. No pretension, no ego. Wow.
Absolutely. I've been lucky enough. I interviewed him a few times over the phone. The last time I saw him was when they issued the stamp
Oh
of
yeah.
Oscar Peterson, and I was there, and I had a chance to talk to him, and I was lucky enough to be able to get one of the first stamps that's framed that I have. Actually, I left it over at my parents' place, so they have it. And to see what I saw and knowing from what I know, brother, you did an amazing job at presenting this legend for generations to see and experience. I am so happy for you, not just for being in TIFF, but to be able to present this piece of art of a
Well,
true Canadian legend.
Rudy, you make me emotional and you touch me by saying that. I mean, I knew the responsibility going in. Why am I telling this story? Why not somebody else? I recognize the responsibility of telling it, and I knew that it had to be right. The music had to be right. There will be critics, so be it. Always is, always are on that end of it. But I knew that I had to do him right, and also respect the jazz world, and hopefully I've done that.
Before we go, you just made me think about something. Any chance for a soundtrack?
We just talked about that yesterday, and yes, not only the pieces that were in there that were recorded for that sort of tribute session that we did on a very cold day in March, on that end of it, where I just sat there in love with watching Larnell Lewis on drums, and and oh my God, just phenomenal musicians. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about that now. There needs to be that, so we're going to sort of figure that out.
Cannot wait. Bear, congratulations again. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Looking forward to seeing this on the big screen during TIFF, and just looking forward to all the work that you do in the future. Again, congratulations, my friend.
Rudy, thank you, and I keep doing what you're doing.